Hi, welcome back to the session of entity relationship model, the ER model itself. Okay, so we'll in this particular session we'll try to understand what exactly a ER model. Okay, what are the different components of an ER model that we have. Okay, and then also we will try to understand the advantage and disadvantage of ER model, right? And also we'll try to make you clear what is an ER diagram, also, right? So having said this, what is an ER model itself? So ER model, it stands for the entity relationship model. Okay, and as I was telling during the time of my discussion in database technique itself, so entity itself, it can be a physical, okay, a real life, it's a concept, or it can be a concept itself. Okay, real life entity itself, it can be a conceptual entity itself. And when you talk about the ER model, we are talking about this entity and how the entity are related to each other. So I gave an example of a student course. Okay, I give the example of the entire institute itself, where we can have certain physical entities, like we have the students, we have the teachers, right? Then we have certain department itself. Okay, and then we have the courses, right? Okay, so that's why we have that student will going through certain courses. Okay, teachers, students, that is teacher teach the students, that learns from the student. So we have a certain relationship, right? So when you talk about ER model, we are talking about these entities, we are talking about this relationship. Uh, okay, right? So that's what it is. At this model, a high level model, we define data elements with and the relationship. But it is a conceptual design, right? When you talk about it's such a conceptual design. When you're talking about this type of entities which are there, okay, and how they are related to each other. Okay, it is easy to develop, and easy to design, and easy to learn itself also, right? So having said this, this is we call it ER model. And ER model itself describes the structure of the database with the help of a diagram, and that diagram is called as nothing but entity relationship diagram, right? So now I hope you are clear that when you talk about ER model, we are talking about how entity relationship, okay, right? How the structure will be look like and all these things. Okay, how entity are related to each other and all. And now, how will you going to represent it? Then you are going to represent. Okay, we are represent through certain diagram itself, and that diagram itself is called as nothing but entity relationship diagram, or we call it as a ER diagram. Okay, right? So you can see this is what the entity diagram itself, okay, looks like. Okay, the ER diagram itself that looks like. So down the line, I will be talking more what the entities, attributes, the what do you say, the relationship and all these things, right? Right? Let me make you understand the components of a ER model. Okay, right? Yes, the components of a ER model, or sometimes many people are saying that these are the components of a ER diagram itself, because that's what we are representing. We are representing that, right? The structure itself. That is what the ER diagram itself. So we have entities, we have attributes, and we have relationships, right? Okay. And if you see under the entity itself, we have, we define it the two types. Okay. One is called a strong, another is called a weak entity, right? Okay. Right. We will be discussing strong entities more in details. Okay. Strong entities are those which has its own existence itself. Weak entity are those which exist and depend upon the strong entity. Okay, and we'll see more on that. Attributes, the key, the composite, the derive, and the multiple value attribute. Again, I will be discussing attributes in a separate way. Okay, right, and relationship also in a separate way. So just understand these are the key, attributes: key, composite, derive, and multi-value. Multi-value mean attribute can have more than one values. Another attribute can be derived from another attribute. Composite, it can be broken down into different parts. That's why it's component. Okay. Key is easily, is have us to identify what the entity itself. Okay. Right. Then we have the relation. What kind of relationship? It based on the degree. Okay. And cardinality. Right. When you say degree, the associativity of the entity. Okay. We can have a single entity itself having some relationship. Then we have two entity that is called binary. We have three entity with quaternary, and then an array means then based on the number of entities we have. Then when you talk about cardinality, we have to how the associativity of this relationship, right? Okay, the instance we will talk about more, right? Okay, of that particular entity, how they are, how instance. Okay, there are four types. One is one to one, one to many to one, and many to many. In many cases, one to one, one to many to one, we simply represent by one itself. Okay, right? So these are the components. Components are the entity, the attributes, the relation. Under entity, we have strong and weak. Under attribute, we have key, composite, derive and multi-valued. Okay, and under relationship, we have two degree and cardinality. Under degree, we have unary, binary, ternary, and anary. Okay, and in the cardinality, we are talking about one to many to one, and many to many itself. Okay, so right, so this AR modeling. Okay, so let me tell you entity anything that have an independent existence, okay, which we want to collect data type, okay, which we all call as an entity type itself. Says for example student itself. Okay, when you take about student, it has an existing instant exist independent existence itself. We have certain associate characteristics also. Okay, now when you talk about instant, we are talking about particular student itself, particular member of that particular entities. As a students, I may have student like Mahesh, Rakesh. Okay, right? Then the Mahesh, Rakesh will be becoming nothing but in the instant, uh, uh, in the instant. Okay, and Mahesh, Rakesh comes under the entity, okay, type, which is called as the student itself. Okay, and when I talk about attributes, these are not even I was talking the characteristics, which is help which describe this particular entity. Like when I talk about student, how I student entity they describe. Okay, like name, it will have a name, it will have a registration ID or ID itself. Student have what kind of courses is studying, which particular branch. Okay, what particular what is his address, who students who is the mentor of the particular student. So all this thing will come under the attributes. So relationship, the association that we have between the entities, right? Now I was talking about that institute as an example. The teachers is one type of entity, students is one type of entity. How student and teachers are associated with it. That's what becomes the relationship, right? Okay. So having said that, then we have the strong entity, okay, which is also called as the regular entity. Okay, that having its own key attributes. Now, what is the key attributes? More will be discussed, but it's something which uniquely identify. Like students, we have the student registration number. So based on the student registration number, I can easily identify the particular student itself. Okay, so then okay, then that particular entity that student ID becomes the key attributes, and enter student becomes a regular entity. So we have employee, we have student, we have customer, policyholder, etc. are the regular strong entity because they are uniquely identified. Okay, right? That is the reason, or it has its own key attributes. Weak entity doesn't have its own existence. It depends upon the other regular entity itself. Okay, say for example, one a particular employee is working on the organization. Okay, then the details of the spouse of the employees, if you store, then okay, and then that's details of spouse will be nothing but weak entity because spouse independent from the employee, right? Tomorrow, if the employee moves out, okay, the existence of the spouse is also not there. Okay, and they don't have a complete key attributes because they're not completely directly involved with in the particular relationship itself. Okay, so having said this, when you talk about strong entity, when you talk about regular entity, we say that entity which is having its own kind of key attributes. Okay, and weak entity which doesn't have any kind of key attribute, and it depends, or its existence depends upon the the strong entity itself. Okay, right? So this again, I come back to the example. Like you can see, the student itself is an entity. Okay, so these are my attributes. Okay, and I was telling that it can be a derived attribute, it can be a multi-value attribute, it can be composite. We'll see, right? Like this address itself can be a composite attribute because it can be broken down, city, state, and all these things and all. Okay, right? Okay, and then this ID itself can be the key attribute. Okay, right? And then you can see the course also. It's another entity. We have CID, the course identification, the name, the duration, and all this thing. And see how student is related to the course itself, right? Student with this particular relationship, right? We can see this student enrolls into the course. Okay, now if all the students, okay, are participating, okay, or not, or that the course are participating or not. So we have partial and all this thing, which we're going to discuss more, right? This is we are calling we having the complete relationship, right? The student enrolling into the particular course. Okay, so I was talking about cardinality, right? One is to one, one is to m. So here the cardinality will come. Students enroll the course. How many students are enrolling? What can be the ratio itself? And this is nothing but a binary, right? If you see, it is a binary because there are two type of entities are there, and these entities are related with some kind of relationship, right? Okay, so I hope you have got a little bit of clear picture about what ER model itself. So when you talk about ER model itself, we are just talking about entity, the relationship model itself, and then ER model itself. When you are designing that particular structure, how entity and relationship related to each other, how diagrammatically we can represent, that's becomes nothing but an ER diagram itself. Okay, then we have understand different components of the ER diagram and or the ER model itself. Like we have the entities, we have the attributes, we have the relationship, right? So entity, we have seen that entity is something which are it can be a physical, it can be a conceptual, okay, right? And entity itself also known as entity type. For example, we have seen like students, okay, like course, employee, and all, okay. And the one particular student, when you talk about, I was taking Mahesh and all, then it becomes nothing but the instance of that particular entity itself. Okay, attributes are the one which are the characteristic which describe that particular entity itself. Like we have the name, ID, and all. Okay, right? And then the relations, we talk about what kind of relations it exists or the association that we have between the two entities. So in that also based on one degree, and another is the cognitive degree means based on how many types of entities are there. So we have, if there is one entity, then which is unary. We have two entities. For example, you can see in this diagram itself, two entities. Then we call it a binary tree. We got ternary, and if it is more, then you get n-ary, right? Then we have the the cardinality, right? Okay, more details. I will talk about cardinality. Means the instant. How many instances are associated, can be associated with it. Okay, so we have one is to one, okay, one is to many, many is to one, and many is to many. Typically, one is to many and many is to many also combine into one aspect itself, like one is to many itself. And in this diagram, we have seen the ER diagram itself, we have seen the entity, we have seen the relationship, we have seen the attributes. Okay, so now we'll we'll go more ahead sorry, we talked about the entity, different type of entity, strong entity and weak entity. An entity which is having its own key attribute, it is called a strong or regular, and once which doesn't have a uh, what you say, which depends upon the strong entity, it is called as the weak entity. Okay, so having said this, we I hope you have understood the entire, things. So some advantages, it is a virtually modeling to have help us to virtually represent, help us to understand more effectively. But the disadvantage is that you can see there are limited, constant representation, limited relation. There is no kind of data manipulation language. Okay, and there may be a loss of information whenever you are doing the attributes, from the attribute itself. Okay, but visually it is you are modeling it. Okay, so it become very simple, effective communications, visual represent make efficient communication also. Okay, right? But a disadvantage is that you are not able to okay, right, limitation on the type of on the constraint. Okay, which we'll see it's constant when you talk about we'll discuss more in the upcoming videos itself. And then we have the limited relationships. Okay, no kind of data manipulation language. What kind of data we'll discuss later on the later parts. Okay. So having said this, thank you so much for watching this particular video.